Free speech, the First Amendment. Does it apply to monkeys, animals, their rights to express themselves? Maybe. PETA is suing the National Institutes of Health, NIH, for blocking PETA's right to receive communication from monkeys imprisoned in labs. And established case law suggests that what NIH is doing is unconstitutional. PETA's top lawyer explains it all on the PETA Podcast with Emil, Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil, Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, free speech rights. It's really a two-way street. But does that include animals? I mean, it's not just the right of a person to make the speech, but the right of a person to receive that speech. Any blockage of that is unconstitutional. That's the claim of Jeff Kerr, chief legal counsel of the PETA Foundation. It's filed a suit saying the National Institutes of Health's blocking of the communication between a macaque used in research and PETA is unconstitutional. It's another bold and provocative legal case that may begin to change people's attitude toward animals. My conversation with Jeff Kerr on this edition of the PETA Podcast with Emil, Guillermo. So, Jeff, thank you for being here. Tell us about this case. You know, PETA is known for groundbreaking lawsuits. The 13th Amendment case against SeaWorld, we had the monkey selfie case, or just two, and now we have PETA suing a government agency, as if they aren't beleaguered enough already. PETA is suing a government agency. What is this suit about?
People have the right to freedom of speech under the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But what they don't always realize is that the flip side of that coin is that people have a First Amendment right to listen or a right to receive communications from what are called willing speakers. Our lawsuit very simply asserts that PETA has its own First Amendment right under the Constitution to hear and receive communications from willing speakers, namely macaques who are being experimented on in NIH laboratories, so that we can receive that information and report on the conditions of their confinement and their torture in these experiments.
All right, so, boy, there was a lot in this, just that first statement. The First Amendment doesn't mean speaking, it also means listening?
That's right. So you have a right to speak that the government cannot interfere with. But I, in turn, have a right to listen to you when you want to speak. And that's the most fundamental aspect of this case. The macaques that are being tortured in experiments in the NIH laboratory of Elizabeth Murray are undoubtedly communicating. And we have a right to receive those communications.
Wait a minute. Now you're saying, I was going to get to the macaque part of this. I was just hung up on the speaker and the listener. You're presuming we need both a speaker and a listener to have the freedom of speech. You need both, but maybe you just need the speaker to speak, no listener.
Well, but the cases that we are relying on come out of the human prisoner context, in which prisoners wanted to speak to members of the media, journalists, etc., to communicate to them the conditions of the imprisonment, what was going on, what was happening to them. And the courts have held that the people who want to report on that information have a right to receive those communications. You can put reasonable, security restrictions and things like that in place. But those media outlets, people like PETA, who report on the plight of animals, have a right to receive these communications from the macaques.
This is kind of like the "it takes two to tango" theory of the First Amendment that you're trying to posit here, right? You got to have a speaker and a listener, and the listener has a right to complete the First Amendment rights of the speaker.
That's exactly right. And the macaques are undeniably communicating. It's been known for decades by people who study primates, including the macaques that we're talking about, that they communicate effectively and intentionally through gestures, body language, vocalizations, things like that. All the things that you and I also use to communicate.
Well, wait a minute now, Jeff. Now you're saying the prisoner in the cases that you were talking about, the precedents you're talking about, equal the macaques, humans equal the monkeys?
Well, equal is a tough word in legal parlance, Emil, and I've got to be careful as a lawyer. We're not asserting a right of equality between the macaques and human beings. We're simply asserting that PETA has a First Amendment right to receive communications when those macaques are willingly speaking, which they undoubtedly are. They're undoubtedly communicating. When I want to be clear, when I say speaking, it's really about forms of communication, because conduct, actions constitute speech under the law. And there's just no question that these macaques are communicating. And we know that from the very limited amount of video footage we've been able to obtain through the Freedom of Information Act, in which we see these macaques smacking their lips, grimacing, turning away from frightening stimuli, shaking their cages, engaging in repetitive behaviors, all indicia of suffering and trauma that they're experiencing.
All right. So if the macaques are communicating this and they're being restricted, then the law really isn't really about the macaques. It's about the people who are restricting their communication to PETA so that PETA can receive that communication.
That's exactly right. And that's why we sued NIH to require them to provide us with access to these communications.
And NIH said, no, they you don't have a right to that, or they made you do a Freedom of Information Act, or
they said a couple of things. We wrote to them back in August and said, look, we want, and we believe we're entitled under the law to a 24/7 live audio visual feed to receive these macaque communications. They responded and said no, and they pointed us in part to Freedom of Information Act requests. But of course, that's a non-starter for several reasons. One, we're entitled to uncensored receipt of those communications. In a FOIA context, NIH is deciding what they record, what they don't record, what they keep, what they don't keep. So there's a huge amount of censorship going on. They also acknowledge to us that they're not videoing these animals or recording these animals for the 23 plus hours of every day that they're confined alone in their cages, during which the macaques are undoubtedly communicating. They're expressing things through the kinds of communication mechanisms I just described. And we have a right to those communications. The government can't censor what we receive from willing speakers.
Right. So you're going after NIH. They're the humans in this, but now they could say, well, wait a minute. We're just bureaucrats. You're really looking after monkey free speech, and there is no monkey free speech in the First Amendment, or there's no macaque free speech.
Well, and we're not asserting that there is a First Amendment right to macaque free speech. We're asserting PETA's own right to receive those communications from a willing speaker. And the law is very clear in this area that our First Amendment right to receive those communications exists, even if the speaker does not have a recognized First Amendment right.
And then really, it goes back to the bureaucrats and their restriction of any speech that PETA can receive.
That's exactly right. And the other point on why FOIA is not sufficient, we've been in several lawsuits against NIH where we've had to sue to force them, sometimes after years, to produce documents under the Freedom of Information Act. So that's just not a viable option when you're talking about trying to receive and report in real time on the conditions that these macaques and other primates are being subjected to in these torturous experiments.
All right, so tell me about these communications that PETA wants released, and what are the monkeys saying? What do you believe the monkeys are going to reveal in this communication?
Right. And this relates to the experts that are cooperating with us in our lawsuit. Dr. Augustine Fuentes, who is a Princeton University professor with expertise in macaque interactions with humans, just looking at the very limited audio-visual footage that we've obtained through FOIA, he's looked at that and he notes recognizable nervousness, fear, agitation, and a desire of the macaques to escape their confinement. And Dr. Liz Tyson, who is a director of Born Free USA's Primate Sanctuary and an Oxford Center for Animal Ethics fellow, she has reviewed those videos and she calls the macaques' communicative behaviors concerning and indicative of significant long-term stress. That's important because their declarations, which we attach to the lawsuit, make clear that we would be able to get even more extensive communication and extensive interpretation of what the macaques are going through if we were able to see more than just these small snippets from experiments, and we were able to see in real time what these macaques were going through and how they were communicating.
So essentially, it's the macaques cry for help. And then what would PETA do with that? End the experiments, call for a ban of the experiments?
Right. First and foremost, much of what PETA does is news gathering and reporting. We go out and research, interview, investigate, and collect information for the purpose of reporting that information to our members and the public. And we have a constitutional right to do that. So first and foremost, it would be to gather the information and report it, just like any other reporters have a right to do. Of course, we're also an advocacy organization, and we would advocate for those experiments to end, as we have been for decades, and for the macaques to be sent to appropriate sanctuaries where they can live out the rest of their lives in peace without the torment of these experiments.
Wait a minute. Now you're saying that PETA is really you're saying they're a journalistic organization in a way.
Of course, absolutely. And in the day and age of the internet and social media, that's one of the great benefits where so many different people and organizations are really engaged in news gathering and reporting. It may not be the thing people first think about when they think about a charity like PETA, but we are undoubtedly engaging in that conduct, and it's been recognized as such by a federal court in a case in North Carolina, where the court found that a particular law infringed on PETA's news gathering activities and had to be struck down.
So when you do an undercover investigation, it's no different from, say, 60 Minutes or any other, reputable news. Well, reputable, I use that advisedly, but any other news organizations, undercover investigations like the Post, Times, that's what PETA does.
Yeah, it's investigative reporting. There may be differences between the way one person or organization does it versus another, but they're essentially the same in that regard.
So tell me about the macaques again. Why not just the communication, but the situation they're in NIH, in the experiments that they're involved in? Why is it important that they be the subject of a lawsuit, that you get that information?
In Elizabeth Murray's laboratory, experimenters trap these frightened and brain-damaged monkeys inside cramped, darkened boxes and then lift a guillotine-like door to reveal rubber spiders and snakes that sometimes move or jump, so she can film the monkey's terrified responses. Now, what she's supposedly studying is a reaction of brain-injured individuals to these kinds of stimuli. But of course, it's ridiculous. What she will do is, in order to do these tests, she uses these crude and invasive methods to damage monkeys' brains. She will immobilize each of them in a vice-like device, carve out a section of the skull, and inject toxins into the brain to cause permanent and traumatic brain damage. And in some experiments, they'll actually suction out portions of the brain. And they will put in head posts to keep the head so that they can keep the head immobilized during experiments. And they will actually screw into their skulls things called head chambers, which is basically an opening that allows them to insert more toxins or cause more brain damage. And of course, nothing has come of these experiments in the nearly 40 years she's been doing them, and to the tune of $50 million of taxpayer money.
You just described it, and the description is pretty bad, but the pictures of it are worse. And this is what these monkeys have been subjected to. I don't suppose, I mean, after you go through a number of monkeys, I mean, you don't go through the same monkey. I mean, once you get a monkey that's already in this state because a researcher has placed them in this state, you don't keep that monkey and keep studying it. You do this to other monkeys, like a series of monkeys, right?
But some of the macaques that we are talking about in our lawsuit have been there for decades. And when they're not being experimented on and tortured in the way I just described, they're held in solitary confinement in barren metal cages with slats on the floor to allow their feces and urine to go through, but they can't escape the smell. And the only rest area they have is a raised metal platform. So, many of these macaques, one of them has actually been identified as plucking 73% of his hair out of his body as an indication of fear and stress. These are chronic problems.
Yeah, and these are the monkeys who are in the videos that you want to understand what they're saying, that NIH has blocked you from getting the communication?
That's exactly right. We've only been able to get a very small sampling of those communications through the videos of the experiments that we've gotten through FOIA. But like I said, the vast majority of the time that they're in their cages, confined solitarily, there's no video. There's no video of the horrific skull experiments, skull procedures that I just described, because they're not recording that. There's no video of what the macaques go through every time their human tormentors come in to remove them from their cages, and the macaques know they're heading to yet another horrific experience. That's what we believe we have a First Amendment right to receive.
What you described in that graphic telling, it sounds more like some kind of sadistic act rather than science. But this has been accepted as science?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. NIH obviously has been allowing her to do these experiments for 40 years and more than $50 million. But like I said, this isn't science. This is junk science, and nothing useful has come out of these experiments. And it's just the all too prominent situation of the gravy train of continued experiments and for no useful purpose, all at the huge expense of taxpayer dollars and the suffering of these macaques.
And, you said that you get a little bit of video that they've allowed you to get. How much more do you need to prove or to make the case that these experiments should end? Or it would more just make it more obvious that these should end? Or why press on? Or is this really a way to expand the notion of animal rights, and that they have in this situation, they are part of a First Amendment right to express, their feelings to PETA and others?
That's right. There are several pieces to that. If I could
Yeah.
sort of peel them back. First of all, PETA does believe that animals are not ours to experiment on, and so of course we want the experiments to stop. But to your particular question about what more we need and what more additional video and of their communications could show us, it will expand the knowledge base and our ability to report on exactly what these macaques are communicating and what they are telling us they're going through every minute of every day when they're confined in a laboratory. And we are convinced that by reporting that, the public will be outraged and will demand that their tax dollars no longer be spent on this. And of course, as I alluded to earlier, the biggest problem with just a few snippets of video that we receive is that it's videos made only during the experimental procedures themselves, but not during the horrific surgical procedures, not when they're being taken from their cages, and not when they're just, for the vast majority of their lives, in solitary confinement in their barren cages. They're undoubtedly communicating their plight every minute of the day. And that's what we have a right to see so that the public can fully understand exactly what these animals go through in every aspect of their lives when they're confined, when they're imprisoned in these labs and tortured in these experiments.
And so if NIH keeps you from this, and which forcing you to sue, essentially what they're doing is suppressing evidence or suppressing a witness.
In our view, they're suppressing our ability to receive the communications from the macaques. So yes, it's suppression of information. They have long engaged in these practices, Emil. They've even tried to prevent PETA executives from attending and presenting at meetings on NIH grounds, even when they were invited. They even forced us to sue them, and we just won a case in 2024 in which they were blocking words like experimentation and things and PETA and things of that nature from their social media to prevent people from commenting negatively about what they're doing to these animals. And we sued, and a federal court sided with us and said, yeah, NIH can't do that. That's unconstitutional.
But in some ways, this is the legal game that lawyers fight, that then judges have to decide. I mean, you argue one thing, they fight you tooth and nail. It's sort of like the way we see everything in our society, the way it's going now, that a judge has to decide. So tell us where the case is now and what is the prognosis?
The case was recently filed about 2 weeks ago, and we are waiting for the government to file its first response, which may be either an answer or they may try to have the case dismissed. That's the typical play of the government when you sue them, and we will be ramping up to fight off that attempt to dismiss the case. And if we survive that, which we fully expect to, then we'll go full speed ahead to what's called the discovery phase, to try to get as much information we can about what they're doing and how we could get this 24/7 live audiovisual feed in there and really expose the extent to which we believe NIH is going to thwart our ability to receive these communications from the macaques.
So really, Jeff, what you're describing is a kind of the process by which animal rights law evolves. Because if you win this case, it could be a very significant thing in terms of the animals. How do you see it? What could it mean in terms of animals' rights?
Yeah, and again, it's important that that I'm clear that we're not actually seeking for the establishment of any right in the animals. What we are asking the court to recognize, however, is that they are undoubtedly willing speakers. That's the term of art under the First Amendment, that they are undoubtedly willing speakers, and they are communicating in the ways that they use and in the ways that we and our experts can understand. So the critical part there is the recognition of the scientific reality, the scientific certainty that these animals are communicating intentionally. And from the overall animal rights perspective, the most important part of this is for us to be able to receive that information and report it so people know what's being done in these laboratories and exactly what these macaques are going through when they're being imprisoned and tortured like this.
Wow. Well, we wait to see how it develops, but I appreciate you taking the time, Jeff, to just break it down, because it does sound like if you do get those videos and if you are able to establish what the macaques are saying, it could be a major thing in terms of bringing these experiments to an end, which PETA has been fighting for decades, really.
That's exactly right. And most people, according to polls, most people in the United States are opposed to animal experimentation, and a vast majority want us to move away from animal experimentation, want us to explore non-animal models of research and technology, AI. It's making that possible at a record pace. And this science needs to be brought into the 21st century and get rid of these medieval experiments.
Jeff Kerr, Chief Legal Officer, PETA Foundation. Really, thank you for being part of the PETA podcast.
Thanks for having me, Emil. It was my pleasure.
Jeff Kerr is Chief Legal Officer for the PETA Foundation. Go to the show links for more or go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. And if you're a macaque, thank you for listening. You're receiving our communication. Make sure that we receive yours. You can maybe call me on my voicemail or something. Hey, don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on X, or Twitter, as they called it, at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at amok.com. See this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. EMILAMOK 1. Like the music? The music is provided by Carbon Works. Hey, check them out on YouTube. And once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. And join us again next time, won't you, please? Next time, for more insight into animal rights. Hey, that First Amendment thing, huh? Possibly? Oh, that's between NIH and PETA, not the monkeys. And well, it is the monkeys and PETA. Anyway, more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo. Thanks for joining us.